Fertility, I would like to thank her because, I think she is the anchor between us and the Association for Fertility Reproductive Health in Africa. So she has been the anchor, and she was she played an instrumental role to get this session for us. And at the same breath, I would also like to thank Mrs. Eduvice, who's the secretary for AFRH. I think she also played a very important role in terms of getting all the participants together. So warm evening to everyone. I think it's about 3 o'clock in Nigeria, and back in India, this is 7:30. So before I would take about a couple of minutes to talk about Oasis Fertility. I think it's important that we should also know about Oasis Fertility, what kind of work we are doing back in India here. So Oasis Fertility is a 10-year-old enterprise. We operate about 12 centers in India today. In fact, we are third largest in the country today in terms of the numbers and in terms of the size and the number of cycles which we do. I think there are a lot of credentials, a lot of respect which is attached to Oasis Fertility, because we are considered to be one of the most respectful fertility centers in the country today. And I would be failing in my duties if I don't talk about Dr. Durga G. Rao, who is the medical director and co-founder of Oasis Fertility, along with Mr. Kiran, who has started Oasis Fertility way back in 2009. And we are a ICMR, Indian Council of Medical Research, registered, and ISO 2001 registered, a certified organization. Well, so I was talking about Oasis Fertility. So we have been selected as power brand for year 2018, 19, as well as 2020 by an organization called IVF India. And we have been recipient of Asian Healthcare Brand Award for 2019 from the Economic Times Group. And as I told you, we are a third largest fertility chain in the country. And in terms of numbers, we typically do about 3,000 IVF cycles annually, and we do about 3,000. So far, we have got about 30,000 plus happy customers altogether in last 10 years. We have a huge clinical expertise. Dr. Sandeep would be speaking more on that. He's one of our, he's one of our clinical heads in our flagship hospital in Hyderabad city in India. And all put together, we are talking about some 300 plus of clinical experience. We have full consultants. We have dedicated embryology lab in all our centers. We have state-of-the-art IVF labs in all the centers. We are very, very high on technology. I think that's when I would like to speak about Jerry Plus, which is, in India, we are the first fertility center who is operating on artificial intelligence of Jerry Plus, which is a Merck platform fundamentally. I'm sure Dr. Sandeep will speak more about it. We also do we were the first to introduce electronic witnessing system in the country. And we are pioneers in a technology called in vitro maturation, which Dr. Durga herself is the pioneer. AndroLife is our dedicated male fertility clinics, which we operate in all the centers. In fact, this is the country's first dedicated male fertility clinic. None of the fertility clinics in the country today operate an exclusive male fertility clinic. And AndroLife is one of them. And Oasis Fertility is very, very proud to talk about AndroLife. Last but not the least, I can see a lot of doctors from the Africa subcontinent, Nigeria especially. And this is an open invitation to a lot of doctors who would like to, do training along with us. So we have an arm called OSHRM, which is Oasis School for Human Embryology and Reproductive Medicine. This is a dedicated school for all the budding embryologists, as well as who would like to kind of focus their career on in reproductive medicine. So we offer different courses. We have courses which span into 3 months, 6 months, as well as an year. So I will be dropping my email ID in the chat box if anybody is interested to kind of pursue their career or get associated with our school. Most happy to do that. I think with this, I would hand over the session to Dr. Sandeep, and Dr. Sandeep today is going to talk about the PGT-A and PGT-SR, fundamentally the clinical outcomes through these technological advanced services. Thank you, Dr. Sandeep. Over to you now. So I'm sorry, actually, just a minute. I think I need to introduce Dr. Sandeep. I just forgot about that. Let me just quickly do that. 1 minute, Razi, clinical head and senior consultant at our Banjara Hills Center. He has graduated and post-graduated from Armed Medical Forces from a city called Pune in India. He has served in Indian Army as a doctor and a gynecologist and has been practicing fertility since last 25 years. And he was head of the ART centers at AHRR, Naval Hospital, as well as Air Force Command Hospital. He is honored with Chief of Army Staff Commendation for Meritorious Service. He has been a professor and examiner of OBG and gynec and reproductive medicine. In fact, he plays a anchor's role in our school, that is Oshram. Led the team which performed the first cortex transplantation of the country in case of malignancy. He has published many papers and contributed chapters in the national and international publications, and he has completed PGDHM from NHFW, New Delhi, and also PGD-MLE from Bangalore, which is in India. So with this, over to you, Dr. Sandeep.
Thank you, Sudhakar. I mean, it was a very kind introduction. Well, I mean, what actually fascinates me is this entire world of infertility and how we could, take things ahead. So let's imagine a couple happily married, living the bliss of marital life. They try to conceive, and unfortunately, one second, the slide somehow is not moving. Yeah. And unfortunately, they end up in a miscarriage. They try again, and yet again, it is met with the same fate. The couple, unfortunately, from partners become parents. They attempt a third time, that fails, and then the blame game begins. Somehow they reconcile, and they go to a doctor for getting some better outcome. The doctor diagnoses a genetic problem called as translocation or an unbalanced or a balanced translocation, one of the couples. But sadly, can't offer much because we were actually restrained by the science available around 4-5 years back. But today things have changed. In fact, when I look back upon my career as a gynecologist and also in the infertility field, the offer to these patients would be as ridiculous as these, having no further children. That is one of the options, just be happy. You two are made for each other. The second option is take a chance. Let's see what happens. Let's wait for the outcome and let's see if you have a normal child or no. Or else you go conceive, we'll take a biopsy of the child and then see if the child is abnormal. How ridiculous is that in today's world? Or else we go in for a gamete donation. Okay, the lady's got a problem in her set of chromosomes. Let's substitute the egg. If the male has got a problem, let's substitute the male. I mean, is it actually really required to jump at this at the very onset? Or else, there's a fail-safe solution called adoption. You can get a perfectly healthy child from any of the adoption centers. How stupid would it seem if we had this knowledge around 10 years back? Yes, the patient would bang their head against the wall. But today, we can offer them something called as pre-implantation genetic testing. It is a wonderful technology for these poor couples, and this technology, when implemented, can help them have their own biological child. So, with the blessings of AFMC, from where I actually done my graduation and post-graduation, my hospital management I've done from the National Institute of Health and Family Welfare, and a bit of law from the National Law School of India University in Bangalore. With all the blessings of all these three great institutes of the country, I today sit in front of you virtually to talk about PGT, a subject which is so close to my heart, so controversial, yet so path-breaking. Of course, I feel that most of the path-breaking things have to be controversial at least for the initial part of things. But yes, it has caught on slowly but surely. We'll go to the background, what steps are required to actually get into the PGT, how do we do the biopsy, the genetic analysis, what are the types of the PGT which are available, what are the outcomes, what does the future hold for in for us, and of course, I will be sharing some of the papers which have been accepted by the ASRM for their conference, which is due a couple of months down, and we have in fact been blessed by the means of ASRM that 11 of our papers have been accepted for presentation there. So a few of those papers which are related to the topic I'll be talking about it also. So and to give my and our personal experience about this entire subject. So let's try to look back in time and see as to how PGT evolved. Well, we all know aneuploidy is an occurrence of a wrong number of chromosomes in a cell. In the human beings, the usual number is 46. Any addition or deletion is called as aneuploidy. In natural gametogenesis in the human race, approximately 20%, believe it or not, 1 in 5 eggs is said to be aneuploid, and 1 in 10 of the sperms is also thought to be aneuploid. These aneuploid gametes after fertilization result in aneuploid embryos, and majority would result in implantation failure, or the nature would reject them as pregnancy losses. Now, in a general population, among all the spontaneous abortions that we see, it's about 40 to 75% is the chromosomal anomaly which is prevalent. A huge number, actually. Aneuploidy has a better, or rather a more pertinent role when it comes to ART technology, because with advancing maternal age, this incidence of aneuploidy might rise up to 80%. Also, the procedure per se of ART is said to increase the rates of aneuploidy because we are going to beat the ovary to get us or give us more and more oocytes. So a recent review of the chromosomal studies of the embryos reported about 73% of the human embryos resulting from IVF do contain some amount of aneuploid cells, and hence this thought process has promoted a lot of work on PGT for aneuploidy, is also today called as PGT-A. I will be talking about all these things in detail as the talk goes by. An old study in 2004 by Santiago Mone et al. Showed that as the age increases of the lady, the number of abnormal oocytes keep rising. And by the time the lady crosses about 42 years of age, about 50%, that is 1 in 2 oocytes is abnormal, which means 1 in 2 embryos is going to be abnormal. Add on to it a male factor, which might also add a bit of aneuploidy. So it is not very rosy as the lady ages. How do we beat it? Why is aneuploidy so high? Incidence of genetic disorders is definitely on the rise. And this is compounded by the fact of the environmental toxins which are getting more and more prevalent. The radiation hazards, be it the nuclear energy which we use or the cell phones emitting microwave emissions. Drugs have changed a lot. We use a lot of drugs for not only normal diseases, but also oncological drugs. And this also raises the incidence of aneuploidy. And of course, as infertility specialists, we also do contribute a bit to this pool of aneuploidic babies that are prevalent. What is the most ideal way to detect aneuploidy? Well, it is good if we can detect them before they conceive, but that's not always possible. Yes, we can isolate the male and the female as to who has the abnormal karyotype and possibly correct it. But by checking the male partner or the female partner, we wouldn't know which embryo would be aneuploid. So possibly at the time of conception or just before it implants, we should be testing the embryo. When we test at this point of time, it is the least emotional stress for the couple. As the baby grows, as it implants, as it becomes a child, or if the birth has taken place, imagine losing a child just because of a disease which we could have prevented if proper steps have been taken. The emotional trauma can definitely go down if we diagnose it as early as possible. So looking back, into the past. I would like to draw the attention of the House to this article, which came around a couple of months back, actually, in the Human Reproduction Update, which actually summarizes the entire journey of humankind through this journey of pre-implantation genetic testing. Well, one of the first papers came in 1990 by Alan Handyside, who actually detected Y-specific, pre-implantation embryos, a problem with Y-specific DNA amplification. After that, it was a lot of papers coming in, and one of the main contributors have been Alan Handyside and Santiago Mune. In 1992, and 93, actually, he did fish and proved that human aneuploidy, especially in these 5 chromosomes, that is X, Y, 18, 13, and 21, these chromosomes detected aneuploidies, aberrations were found in these set of chromosomes. He used fish technology, and of course, you can't test all the chromosomal number in it. And he found that 70% of the abnormally developing embryos had aberrations. This was again proven in an article in 1995 by the same group, actually, wherein he proved that the cleavage stage aneuploidy significantly increases with maternal age. So the age correlation was started actually in the previous century. Now, let's talk about PGT in a practical aspect of things. We do it to either screen or diagnose the genetic disorders, and of course, this is done prior to implantation. The process involves 2 parts basically. One is the biopsy of the embryo or the gamete, and the biopsy part has to undergo genetic analysis. And how we do this is by different techniques, which I'll be elaborating slightly later. So let's talk about the biopsy part. Well, there are different stages that we could talk about. One second. Yeah. Okay. The first stage is when you have a mature egg, you can pull out the polar body, the first polar body. Once fertilization takes place, we can pull out both the polar bodies for analysis. In the cleavage stage, that is a day 3 embryo, we can pull 1 or 2 of the blastomeres. And when it comes to the blastocyst, we can pull out a few of the trophectodermal cells. Generally, it is between 5 to 10 cells that is biopsied and analyzed. So as I said, both the polar bodies and up to 5 to 10 trophectoderm cells can be pulled out for the biopsy. Well, what equipment do we require? We obviously require the micromanipulator, or popularly called as the ICSI machine. We need the laser because that is the in thing when it comes to what we call as zona drilling. We need some disposables in terms of the biopsy needles, some glass plates, because these are very specific plates that we require for laser use, and the tubing equipment that is required to put the biopsy part of the embryo into a specialized tube. Also, what is required is a special media called the PGT media. The first step is to make a hole in the zona pellucida. Initially, we used to use mechanical drilling or mechanical zona penetration. Then came the use of acid thyroid solution, which was called as chemical zona penetration. But today, the state of art or the in technology is a non-contact laser. We use the heat of the laser to make a hole on the zona, which is called as thermal ablation. So a laser is fired on the zona pellucida. It looks like a circle, but if you rotate the embryo by 90 degrees, it's actually a slit. So through this slit, we biopsy the maximum part of the embryo or what is needed to be analyzed. So we have 3 parts, 3 different types of biopsies that can be done. That's the polar body, blastomere, and the trophectoderm. The polar body biopsy is done. This is, of course, a fertilized oocyte. You can see both the polar bodies here. And now we get the laser. This is the laser tracker. And you fire the laser in straight lines so that a hole is made in the zona. And then you pull out the polar bodies one by one. This is a specific pipette that we are using. This is the holding pipette, and this is a polar body biopsy pipette. A bit of coaxing is required to get these things out because the hole which we make on the zona might not be actually very uniform. So you have the 2 polar bodies which are being biopsied and taken out of the developing embryo. The main disadvantage, however, is that we can only diagnose maternal aneuploidies in this. But there is an advantage in this entire thing. If the lady is contributing to the entire process, I mean, if she has a balanced translocation, we could do this procedure, and moreover, greater time is available to perform the genetic testing. You have the time from the day 0 to day 5. In the meantime, the entire reports may be available so that you could actually go on and transfer the same embryo without cryopreservation. Polar body biopsy, unfortunately, has not really stood the test of time. A STEAM trial was done between the years 2012 to 2016, in which they analyzed the polar body, both the polar bodies 1 and 2, between the age group of 36 to 40 years. But unfortunately, it couldn't improve the live birth rate as compared to a non-biopsied set of embryos. So there was no difference in either group. But of course, this was a generalized population and not the population which had a maternal genetic disorder. The next biopsy, of course, is the blastomere biopsy. We do a blastomere biopsy when it is on the 3rd day. Again, here we have this a beautiful grade 1 embryo, as you can see. The laser is being fired here. We make the hole to the size of a blastomere. Note that the pipette also is of approximately the same size. Once the entire hole is made, you require smaller laser, and we make repeated holes so as not to damage the blastomere. And once the hole is made, we actually use the blastomere biopsy pipette. The entire thing is to get both the hole as well as the pipette on the same plane of that is made out by focusing both the things at the same time. So you pull out one of the blastomeres from the resulting 8-cell embryo. What helps us in this process is actually the presence of the PGT media, wherein you have a calcium magnesium free media and the cell-to-cell adhesions are weakened. So this helps us pull out one of the cells from the growing embryo. So you have the cell which can be tubed later and sent for analysis. So you could remove 1 to 2. Of course, not many people believe in removing more than 1. The good advantage is, as compared to the polar body biopsy, we analyze both the maternal as well as the paternal genetic contribution. But sadly, only a small amount of genetic material is received. We have only 1 cell as compared to about 8 to 9 cells that we could pick out from a trophectodome biopsy. Besides, there's a huge issue about mosaicism. The mosaic rates are known to be much higher in cleavage stage embryo, but this could autocorrect by the stage of blastocyst. So are we doing right by doing a blastomere biopsy? Well, the world has left blastomere biopsy a little behind in time, and we have all moved to trophectodome biopsy. Also, when you remove 1 cell from an 8-cell embryo, you are taking out 12.5% of the potential genetic material or the cytoplasm of a growing embryo, which might lead to a slow development of the blastocyst stage. So we move on to what is the latest in time, that is trophectodome biopsy. So when you talk about the trophectodome biopsy, we pull out the trophectodome after making the hole. Remove that part where you pull in the trophectodome into your biopsy pipette, and here we apply the laser at the cell-to-cell junction. Now you could see the laser just being applied and the cells start separating. So you apply the laser here again now, and the cell will slowly move away from each other. Now you could see the cells being moved away. Now we take a couple of shots around this side. Yeah, and then the entire cells are separated, and this separated piece of the trophectodome could be sent for biopsy to give us the desired results. Of course, today, day 5 biopsy or the trophectodome biopsy is the technology to stay. The viability is much better when you do a day 5 biopsy as compared to day 3. Also, the higher mosaicisms and embryo self-correction might be normal by day 5 as compared to day 3. The only perk that day 3 biopsy gives is possibly we could avoid cryopreservation in these cases. But however, today these negatives outweigh the positives, and day 5 biopsy is now the norm. Evaluation of the biopsy. Once Of course, we could have an entire thing which is euploid, then it's very easy to do. Or if the entire thing is aneuploid, which is shown in yellow, then we get a uniform biopsy. But what happens if we have mosaics, that is two types of cells, either euploid or aneuploid cells present in the same embryo, then we might get a good biopsy if the uniformity is maintained. But if you biopsy the mosaic part of the embryo, it is a wrong biopsy. Or if you biopsy the euploid part in a mosaic, again, it's a wrong biopsy. So it's a very difficult thing for us to assess whether what we have biopsied is the correct biopsy or no. Once the biopsy is reached or the biopsy stage is done, we send this genetic material for analysis. This analysis has evolved in time from FISH, that is fluorescent in situ hybridization, quantitative PCR, array CGH, single nucleotide polymerase, also called as SNP. But what we have today is called the NGS. I am not going to talk about the first four because these have slowly been outdated, and I'll be stressing upon the NGS or the next generation sequencing. What is next generation sequencing? It actually amplifies the entire genome of the embryo, followed by the library preparation. What it does is it arranges the entire set of chromosomes in a certain order with the help of tagging and fragmentation. Then PCR is done. There are two major platforms available today for NGS. One is the Illumina platform, also called as Verisec and MESEC, or the Thermo Fisher, which is also called as the Ion Torrent. Both these are benchtop sequencers. They have a wonderful or a fast turnover, and the results could be available within 24 hours if you have an in-house sort of a sequencer with you. Well, both of them, however, differs in the way they are synthesizing or analyzing the entire set of chromosomes. In the MySic, that's the Illumina platform, they actually, the single bases are detected with the help of a fluorescent label and incorporated into the growing DNA strand. These could identify chromosomal aneuploidies, mosaicism, the mitochondrial copy numbers, which is also important, what we call as mitoscore, and which allows for a lot of screening of single gene disorders and translocation. It is so sensitive that the overall error rate is said to be under 1. When it comes to the ion torrent given by the Thermo Fisher, they use certain different technology. Here, the semiconductor sequencing technology is used, wherein a proton is released when the nucleotide is incorporated into the growing DNA strand. Now, when this proton is incorporated, there is a slight change in pH. Now, this change in pH transmits a small electrical pulse, which is measured. And once you wash out these unbound nucleotides, this transmitted electrical pulse is measured by a computer, and that translates into a DNA sequence. Now, this ion torrent doesn't require fluorescence or camera, and hence it decreases the cost and the size of the machine, and also helps in faster sequencing. Now, whole chromosome aneuploidies, deletion, duplications can be detected even up to a resolution less than 1 MB, which is a very, very great sort of penetration to detect an abnormal thing. The overall error rate is said to be less than 2%. The sensitivity touches 100 and the specificity near 100. So it's a beautiful technology, and most of these chromosomal anomalies that we wish to detect can be done with the help of NGS. Well, when you compare it to the older technologies, of course, the initial cost is going to be high because it's a later technology. The time duration is less, that is around 24 hours. It's a slightly complex sort of a machine, and you will need technical hands to manage your thing. Most of the chromosomal anomalies are detected by the NGS. The only limitation being at times balanced chromosome translocation cannot be detected here, because the number here is not affected in the baby or the genetic material that you are analyzing. But the good thing is that balanced chromosome translocation generally doesn't lead to any after effects as far as the child is concerned. And of course, the good thing is that it has very high resolution. What are the steps that need to be done for PGT. We talked about the biopsy and the analysis. Yes, we begin with IVF, that is controlled ovarian stimulation. ICSI, you cultivate the embryos up to the 5th day. Embryo biopsy is done. The biopsied embryo, we wait for it to re-expand. Then the embryo is frozen. The resultant biopsy is sent for PGT. Then you get the genetically competent embryo, which is identified. And this genetic competent embryo is later transferred on a frozen embryo transfer cycle. What are the different types of PGT that are available for us? The International Glossary on Infertility and Fertility Care, which was published in 2017, identified 4 types of PGT. The most popular ones are, of course, PGT-A and PGT-M. PGT-A, of course, is for aneuploidies. It screens all the 46 chromosomes which are there in the embryo. PGT-M is done for monogenic disorders, that is a single gene disorder. If at all a child, if a parent is carrier of cystic fibrosis gene, BRCA gene, you could detect if the resultant embryo is also affected by the same disorder. Also, PGT-SR, these are structural rearrangements which manifest in the embryo, which result in actually recurrent implantation failure or recurrent pregnancy losses. If these structural rearrangements are detected in the parent, if they are being passed on to the child, it can be detected. So these 3 happen to be the most popular one. A slightly unpopular, or it hasn't actually caught on, is the PGT for HLA. That is, if you have a child who is affected by a certain disorder, for example, let's say thalassemia, you need to do a bone marrow transplant. You don't find a HLA compatible donor. You could make an embryo which is an HLA compatible, implant it, have a child, and this one brother or sister could be the donor for the sibling. How ethical it is not the purview of the talk, so I'm not going to touch much on it. It all depends on which country or which place you're doing this sort of procedure. So let's talk about PGT-A, that is PGT for aneuploidies. Well, the indications are simple. If the patient has a advanced age, classically defined as more than 37 years in the Caucasian population. However, in our subcontinent, we generally cut this down by around 2 years to 35. We are really worried when the lady starts to be infertile after the age of 33, 34, and the entire thing of aneuploidy start coming into our mind. Repeated implantation failure is another indication, which is classically defined as about more than 3 implantation failures, or more than at least 4 good quality embryos have failed to implant on at least 3 cycles, and a history of recurrent pregnancy losses. Initially, it was 3 recurrent losses or 3 consecutive miscarriages. Now, of course, we have started investigating at even if the lady has only 2 consecutive miscarriages. So this is how the NGS result would look like. This is a euploid status, that is, there are 2 chromosomes present. As you can see, the numbers are mentioned here, 1 to 22 and X and Y. Of course, the bigger chromosomes are here, as we all know that the bigger chromosomes have the lead in number. So hence it occupies a higher space. This is what we call a library, where everything is arranged in a serial manner. Now, if this is euploid, here it suddenly dips down at the level of 16th chromosome. So this embryo is monosomy for 16. Of course, one X and one Y is present, which means it was a male child. So this is a monosomic 16 embryo. Similarly, here we have a monosomy of the 21st chromosome. So it is 45XX with a monosomy of 21. Here we have trisomy. Here the number 16 is more than 2. So it has gone up. Here you have a male child with excess of a 16 chromosome. In India, however, we don't do the X and Y chromosome because of restrictions by the government. So these pictures are captured from the West actually. Here we have a classical Down syndrome, which is represented by a trisomy of 31. It is a female offspring because two X's are present and there is no Y. Here it is 0, here is 1, here it's 2, and here it is 3. So we have 321 chromosomes and 0 Y chromosome and 2 X chromosomes. So we have a female child who is trisomy. Here is a multi-chromosomal anomaly. We have a deficiency of 7, we have an excess of 11, we have a deficiency of 16 in an XY offspring. Again, a multi-chromosomal problem. We have a female child represented by 2 X's and 0 of Y. We have an excess of 22, a deficiency of 16, and an excess of 11 also. How beneficial is PGT-A when it comes to IVF cycles? One of the most beautiful articles is one which is published in 2018 in the European Journal by Anderson et al. I will take you through this journal, or this article rather, in a stepwise manner. When you compare the intention to trial, you can easily see across the ages that the PGT-A embryos, which are depicted in a blue color, has a much better live birth rate. As you can see, it is there present across the board. It is much better than its non-PGT-A counterpart across the age, even in 34 years. And as the age increases, the non-PGT embryos are almost zero implantation, but still we could expect results if we are transferring a euploid embryo. The embryo implantation rates, when you do an embryo transfer with a PGT-A embryo, a euploid embryo, it is almost 65 to 70%, which almost equals that of a donor cycle implantation rate, even across all the ages, under 35 to over 43. So independent of the age of the oocyte source or the recipient uterus, the euploid embryos have similar efficiency and success. Even the live birth rate also maintains these standards. So ovarian source or the uterine recipient have no effect on euploid embryos when tested with the help of PGT-A. And this has a huge database from 2012 to 2018, almost about 6 to 7 years of data which is accumulated. Now, this is a comparison of the live birth rates between a center, that is South California Center of Reproductive Medicine, who was doing the PGT-A versus the national data, that is the Society of ART, the SART data of 2016. So they were comparing PGT-A data versus against a national constant. Here again, you see that the PGT-A has a much better live birth rate across all ages. When it comes to euploid morphology, the morphology versus the euploid nature, we realize that as the grade of the embryo goes down, the euploid rates also goes down. And this is more pertinent by the trophectoderm quality. That is the second letter. So you have the second letter, which is better. It has a better implantation or a better morphology rate. We know that some of the blastocysts are found on day 6 and day 7. But however, despite being euploid, a day 5 embryo has a better implantation rate as compared to a day 7 embryo. How this is happening is still not explained by science. And these numbers are actually significant statistically. Even the spontaneous abortion rates in a day 5 embryo is much lesser than a euploid day 7 embryo. Another article which really supported the PGT-A is one which was published in the JARG, that is Journal of Assisted Reproduction and Genetics, in the second half of last year, which showed that PGT-A undoubtedly improves clinical outcome by reducing pregnancy losses, and it has, however, no major impact on the cumulative live birth per egg retrieval. I'll talk about the second part in detail as the talk progresses. When you go into the statistics of this article, you see that the live birth rate in a PGT cycle is much, much higher per transfer. Now, the most important thing here is per transfer, whereas you can see it is drastically different. The miscarriage rate is also much less in a PGT embryo. The multiple pregnancy rates are obviously zero because in PGT we generally don't transfer more than one embryo. Of course, we have done some studies regarding this, which I'll be talking again later. But when you have transferred the entire set of embryos, the cumulative live birth rate will catch up, which is obvious because the euploid embryo is selected by trial and error, and finally all the euploid embryos will be transferred, and hence the cumulative live birth rate will catch up when you are not doing PGT as compared to PGT. So again, when you compare a PGT embryo versus a day 3 and a day 5 control, we definitely do have a high advantage assigned to the PGT-A embryo. Here you can see almost a double live birth rate, negligible miscarriage rate, and no multiple pregnancy rate or any aneuploid pregnancy, which is obviously it has to happen because we are only transferring the euploid embryos. This is another very important trial done by Santiago Mone and team, which is called the STAR study group, which said that PGT-A somehow doesn't improve the overall pregnancy rate. What I mean here is it does not improve the cumulative pregnancy rate, but that is when you're comparing it to a oocyte retrieval, not a oocyte transfer. But there was a significant improvement on the ongoing pregnancy rate when you consider embryo transfer with the use of PGT-A. And this difference increases as the age of the lady increases. There was a lot of rebuttal to the STAR study also, and one of the papers which was published early this year by Overetio et al., which actually took a dig at the STAR analysis and showed if you do a subgroup analysis in these patients of the same data, the claims could be nullified. And they suggested a model wherein they suggested that a day 3 embryo without prior PGT had the maximum implantation rate, a day 5 embryo without PGT-A as the second best, and the women with undergoing PGT-A had the least. Routine utilization of PGT may not actually improve IVF outcome, and hence it should be given to those people who require PGT-A to improve IVF outcome. What has happened? I mean, this one of the conclusions of the study was that despite about 2 to 3 decades of the progress of PGS, as it was initially called, from PGS 1 to PGS, I'll talk about 1 and 3, of course, later. Somehow this procedure has not been able to demonstrate the promised improvements in the live births. Well, why it has not happened is possibly we are not using it in the correct way it was meant to be used, or possibly we haven't actually able to envisage the correct use of this technology. So do we test or not test? But however, when we do this, we could do a lot of counseling with the help of PGT-A. So this paper, which was published in the second half of last year in Human Reproduction, suggested that PGT-A may actually be detrimental to those patients about 38 years and old, because, especially if they are doing their first cycle, because you might be actually harming the embryo more than giving benefit to the patient. And hence, the entire process of PGT-A should be rather used as a guide for counseling of patients rather than, to forcing them to actually go in for a PGT-A cycle.
So I guess a lot of people have been sending private message to me that they would require the video recording of this presentation.
I think we are already putting it in YouTube, so they could access it from there.
I have shared my email ID also to people who would like to have access to this video.
And Sudhakar, I would also like to add that we give PGT training to our students also.
Exactly.
So anyone interested in PGT-A, we could, or rather PGT per se, we could have classes as well as, tailor the program according to their requirement of the students who come. It could be a weekend training program or extended training program, depending on the needs of the people who knock on our doors.
Absolutely. So I think I'll be in touch with the AFRH, and and it goes without saying again, acknowledgement to Dr. Amarachi, so who who has been very instrumental in, setting this up. I know it got delayed by a couple of weeks, but nevertheless, I think it was a good show overall. And then, we were very glad to be with the entire Dr. Fraternity here from Nigeria.
We also look forward to more interactions in the future.
Absolutely. So I think there are no more questions then I guess it is time to sign off then.
Yeah, Sudhakar, it's a little late for me to.
Yes, I know. Thank you so much, Dr. Sandeep. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure. Yeah, thanks a lot.
All the audience were very, very patient listening to this. Thank you so much. So we are signing off. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.